Welcome back to Close Mode. I'm Dan Sanchez, and I'm joined today by Brian Dietmeyer, who has had a fantastic career through working at Marriott as a VP of sales, and you've led your own consultancy. You are now working at launching Close Strong, an AI sales company. But I wanted to go back to the beginning of your career, or near the beginning of your sales career, because you've referenced it on the show so many times, Brian, that I'm like, oh, I know there's gold nuggets in there.
Yeah.
Because you got to work with a legendary leader who really showed you a lot of like what really good leadership. Every time you share a story, I'm leaning into it because it's rare that you get to work with a leader that's that good at leading that kind of a culture.
Yeah.
So I wanted to kind of open it up to like, what did you learn from Bill Marriott while you were there that's become invaluable, that you found was probably uncommonly strategic or uncommon leadership compared to other places you've been in now? What are some of those lessons that you learned?
And you already know this, but I kind of have a hero worship relationship with this guy. And I didn't work directly for him, but I was fortunate enough to be in the room with him often. And we've had, as you know, we've had other guests on the show, the chief customer officer of Newman's Own, Walt Zola. We had a United States Marine on talking about Marine servant leadership. So as we add to our leadership body of work, I'm proud to add this in there. But Bill Marriott has guideposts that are crystal clear. And even in a couple of his direct reports, who I reported to, it came down to them. So Bill Marriott just had a way when we were struggling with decisions. And I can give you an example. So we're looking at a group of hotels that were franchised, and they weren't hitting the right metrics that we were looking for, and we were all really struggling with it. And looking at the fees, the management fees that came from these 10, 12 buildings, whatever they were. And we're like, oh man, yeah, they're not doing things the way we want it to be done, but there's all this money. And Bill Marriott, in his typical way, if you've never heard him speak, he's very understated and sort of slow, almost as a drawl. And Bill Marriott walked in and he's like, what are you guys working on? And we told him, and he said, just remember, every decision you make is a deposit into or a withdrawal from brand equity, and bolted. And quite frankly, we were all focused on the money. These were management fees that are kind of pure bottom line stuff. And his leadership made that so clear. And it's impacted me. This was 25 years ago, Dan. And I remember the conversation today, and my experience as a Marriott VP and then founding a couple consulting companies. I keep that in mind. Like, short-term cash flow can go away. You've got to think about the brand. What does it mean to your employees, and what does it mean to your customers? And it's that kind of leadership that makes decisions easy. When you're making decisions in that framework of what your leader believes in, it's pretty cool.
Have you used that to guide any of your decisions on your own leadership? Like, do you have guideposts now that guide your decision making?
Oh yeah.
Or help your teams make better decisions?
Yeah, I hope that folks around me in the last couple of organizations feel that, but I will prioritize brand over cash flow when we need to, long-term brand equity, and that means making some tough short-term decisions sometimes, and it's just the same in my last consulting company. I had a lot of 1099s who were out there selling for me, and there'd be times when their expense reports would come in, and something would be gray on a commission or the daily rate that they should be paid. And if it was gray at all, what I used to say to our accountant is, anytime it's gray, you default to them. Of course, unless someone's taking advantage of it and they do it 5 times in a row. But anytime there's a lack of clarity, even if I pretty certain Dan and I had this discussion, if there's any grayness whatsoever, I'm paying the extra fees. And then I'm gonna come back to you and go, okay, for the next time, let's do it this way. But that's a really tactical level piece where it was super easy for me to just go, no, I'm gonna pay it because my personal brand equity, my company brand equity with these 1099s just went way up. I did a similar thing with a guy who had a piece of soft equity, mirror equity in our business, and he was leaving just prior to vesting. And this was 15 years ago. And I vested and paid him out when he left. And for 15 years, he's been almost like an indentured servant. And he's a consultant. And there's many times when I call him up, I'm like, dude, I need help with whatever. And I just want a few sentences in an email back. And I get spreadsheets from him and tons of research. And he goes back to that time. And he's like, yeah, I'll never forget. So and that's not me. That came from Bill Marriott. And it's an easy filter to run your decisions through.
So there's essentially two lessons here. One is around always preferring reputation over to short-term gains, especially cash capital gains.
Yeah.
But the other lesson is having clear stakes in the ground as far as to what you believe and how you want your company to operate in.
Yep.
Which are really preference over one thing over the other, like brand and reputation over short-term profits.
Yes.
That was a guidepost, but you could have different guideposts. You could always opt for short-term cash because maybe I don't know why you would do that as a company, but some they clearly do. I don't know if that's a guidepost for them or if they're just thinking short-term, but it's clearly a thing. But having other values and stakes in the ground that this is what we value here, so we always choose.
Well, the short.
It's funny because a lot of people have core values, but they don't really help guide your decisions most of the time. They're just kind of like, be good. You're like, okay, excellent.
Great. We had in my last business, and we've pulled it over into the next one. As we say, we're a company who's run by smart people who are good people, and I had a couple really smart people who were not so good on the good side. And I had some of my partners come to me and they're like, dude, what about the smart people who are good people? And these two gentlemen at one point had 73% of my revenue that they were bringing in. We shot both of them over a period of the next 3 months, and it was painful. But the team came and called me out on it. They're like, you're leaning into the smart with these guys, but you're not leaning into the good. The other thing that Bill Marriott used to say, and I think he may have even gotten this from his father, J. Willard Marriott, that take care of your employees, take care of your customers, profits will take care of themselves, which is very closely related to the other thing that we talked about. And it's those leading indicators. And even the scorecard for some of the hotel was margin, guest satisfaction, and associate satisfaction. So if you're doing great margins and you're making your customers happy and you're killing your associates in a service business, that's death. So it wasn't enough, and it would be enough in most businesses. Margin is usually enough, even if customer sat's a little bit lower. But no, margin, customer sat, and associate sat in this balanced scorecard. He called it, like you had to be hitting on all three, or you weren't getting your bonus for the year. You weren't getting your number.
That's the key. I mean, that's kind of the key for any company, right? Because if you might get margins in the short term, but if you don't take care of the other two, those margins are going to suffer in the long term.
Yeah,
it's just what's going to happen. So you have to work to balance all three. That's why they balance, because they're opposing each other.
Yeah,
because it's easy to optimize one. It's a little harder to optimize two, but optimizing all three is wicked hard. But that's our goal. That's our task.
It was crystal clear. It was backed up. If we made decisions based on that balanced scorecard, we knew that they were going to fly. But there's so much about working for Marriott that I learned. Steve Wise was a direct boss of mine, and I often tell people the story. One year he called me junior, and it was when I was first promoted to VP of National Account Sales, and I get a Christmas card from him and saying, "Junior, you were a big part of my success for this year." Well, by the way, Dan, I knew that was bullcrap. Steve was at a pretty high level, but that investing in the associates, I think he was an EVP, sent me a handwritten Christmas card, making me partially responsible for his success 20 years ago, dude. And it's still fresh in my brain. My direct boss, my last direct boss, Roger Dow, he and I didn't get along really well in the beginning. It was mostly kind of on me. And he heard from other people that I wasn't fond of him. And he gave me a book called Lincoln on Leadership. And Roger came up to me and said, "You can't be a good leader until you're a good follower." And that's all he said, and handed me this book. And I knew what happened in that moment, but it's those kind of leadership qualities that ran across the board in this place that I remember all these years later. And because I know how they all felt, whether I was making a business decision or someone 4 levels above me was telling me something like that, this is leadership. And again, alongside the other folks we've talked to about leadership on the podcast, yeah, I hope these ideas resonate a little bit with others.
Gosh, that's such a power move, but such a grace-filled move at the same time. The handing you the book and
Oh
being
yeah,
like, be a good follower. Because, man, there's a lot of things he could have done. And what leaders mostly do is they don't say anything and then they passively aggressively just move you somewhere else, let you go, or just kind of put you in the corner without saying anything about it, is usually how
that is
that goes.
that's precisely the right way to round out this story. That's a really good point, because that is the alternative, and I think that's a little more typical. And again, he didn't even reference the
A
incident.
little more.
I
That's a
knew.
lot more.
I
That's the
knew.
more common way to go. It's harder to
Yeah.
actually go and have, and like usually a crucial conversation's hard to have. They're a little longer. He does it in like like one sentence and hands you a
Yeah.
book, puts
And
it in your court to
yeah.
either get it right or he would justifiably let you go.
Yeah, and completely elegant. The same with Steve Weiss
Yep.
sending me this Christmas card, making me responsible for his
Yep.
success. Which I'm sorry,
Yeah.
no, I wasn't. Like all of those things, we forget as leaders that like giving people clear, true north to make decisions in, and then investing back. Keeping associate satisfaction high. As good leaders, evidenced by their behavior with Roger and Steve.
So that's kind of the lesson from this episode. Like set a true north as guideposts. Operate within that, especially as a leader. You got to go above and beyond to demonstrate it, like he did with sending a Christmas card, and
Yeah.
then have a balanced set of metrics that you're holding people accountable to. And it probably should be the same ones that we just mentioned
Yes.
of do right by the customer, have good margins, make sure you treat your employees well, and everything will that those
Yeah.
are the three things to do. And even
Yeah.
as a sales leader, it's treat your reps well, make sure the customers win, make sure you hit your numbers and the company's still profitable because you can't discount everything.
Yeah, I learned that from one of our last leadership interviews with the United States Marine, where he was I shouldn't say former Marine, because I guess you're never former, but he's current VP of Sales, and said a lot of sales leaders are kind of dogging people about what's happening with your pipeline, and his approach as a servant leader was, how can I help you? This deal is stalled. Like internally, is there something I need to do? Is there something with the customer? How can I help you move this forward? It's a subtle shift, but that's leadership versus like accounting or auditing, which is what a lot of people do, and they call it leadership. And it's like it's math management, and yeah, some of that is in our role, but leading with a human is, yeah, it's impacted me. Like I said, I can tell these stories. I remember the actual conversations 20 or more years later, precise conversations. I can also remember some bad ones too, by the way, at different organizations. So, but
Save those for another episode. We'll
save
break
those
those
for the
down.
doom and gloom episode.
Brian, thank you so much for taking some time today to share some of the leadership lessons you've learned from your past with Marriott.
Thank you.